The warning lights flashed red across the bridge of the Starbound Harmony. Captain Zethka's pointed ears twitched as he stared at the main screen. Something big was moving through space ahead of them. Something that should not be there. "Unknown vessel detected," called out Navigator Palax from her station. Her scaled hands moved quickly over the controls. "It's not on any of our charts, Captain." Zethka growled low in his throat. The sound came from deep in his chest, like all sounds made by the Veltar people. His wolf-like features showed worry as he watched the screen. The cruise ship carried over 3,000 passengers from 12 different worlds. His job was to keep them safe. "Size and weapons?" he asked. "About half our size," Pelax said. "I'm picking up some kind of energy signature. But I can't tell what type of weapons they have." In the passenger areas of the ship, aliens from many worlds went about their daily routines. The Thrix merchants clicked their mandibles as they traded goods in the market level. Their insect-like bodies moved in quick, sharp motions. The Ashanti diplomats glowed softly as they discussed trade agreements. Their crystal bodies caught the ship's lights and threw rainbows on the walls. But it was the Veltar cubs who sensed trouble first. Young Kesra lifted his nose and sniffed the air. Something felt wrong. His packmates gathered around him, their ears flat against their heads. "Do you smell that?" asked Nexus, the smallest of the group. "Fear," Kesra said. "The adults are afraid." On the bridge, Captain Zethka made his decision. "All hands battle stations. Passengers to emergency quarters. This is not a drill." The ship's voice system carried his words through every corridor. Aliens of all kinds stopped what they were doing. Parents grabbed their children. Merchants closed their shops. Everyone knew the rules of space travel. Unknown ships usually meant pirates or worse. But then something unexpected happened. The unknown ship sent a message. "Greetings, Starbound Harmony," came a voice speaking perfect galactic standard. "This is the exploration vessel New Horizons. We come in peace and request permission to make contact." Zethka's ears stood up straight. Pirates did not usually ask permission. They took what they wanted and left. He looked at his communications officer, a blue-skinned Aquari named Glubven. "Is this some kind of trick?" Zethka asked. Glubben's tentacles moved over his controls. "The message seems real, Captain. They're broadcasting on all peaceful contact frequencies." "Where are they from? What species?" "They say they are humans from a world called Earth." "I've never heard of either." Zethka thought for a long moment. The ship carried many important passengers. Diplomats, merchants, and families on vacation. If this was a trap, many would die. But if these humans were truly peaceful, attacking them would be a terrible mistake. "Send a reply," he said finally. "Tell them they may dock at Bay 7, but warn them that any hostile action will be met with force." The docking bay was soon filled with security guards. Veltar soldiers stood at attention with their plasma rifles ready. Thrix security clicked nervously as they watched the airlock. Everyone wanted to see what these humans looked like. The cubs had found hiding spots behind cargo containers. They were too curious to stay in the emergency quarters like they were supposed to. Kesra pressed his face against the cold metal and watched the airlock door. "What do you think they look like?" whispered Nexus. "Probably ugly," said another cub named Torex. "All new species are ugly." The airlock finished its cycle. Green lights showed that the atmosphere was safe. Captain Zethka stepped forward with his guards behind him. The heavy door slid open with a soft hiss. A single figure stepped through. The gasps that came from every throat were not from fear of ugliness. They were from shock and terror. The creature that walked into the docking bay was clearly a predator. He stood on two legs like many species, but everything else about him screamed danger. His eyes faced forward instead of to the sides. Every predator in the galaxy had forward-facing eyes. It was the mark of a hunter. His mouth showed flat teeth, but the cubs could smell the meat-eater scent on him from across the bay. He was tall but not huge. His skin was pale brown and covered with simple blue clothing. Dark hair covered the top of his head, with gray streaks that showed his age. But none of that mattered. What mattered were those forward-facing eyes that marked him as something that hunted other creatures for food. The cubs behind the cargo container began to whimper. Kesra felt his heart beating fast in his chest. Every lesson he had learned in school told him to run. Predators were dangerous. Predators could not be trusted. Predators always hunted. But the human did something strange. He raised both hands in the air, palms facing outward. His voice was calm and quiet when he spoke. "My name is Jake Morrison," he said in perfect galactic standard. "I come from the planet Earth. My people are new to this part of space. We seek only to learn about other cultures and to share what we know of our own." Captain Zethka's hand moved closer to his weapon. Every instinct told him this was wrong. Predators did not ask for cultural exchange. They took what they wanted. They hunted. They killed. "You are a predator species," Zethka said. His voice carried the growl of his people. Jake nodded slowly. "Yes, humans evolved from hunting ancestors. But we also evolved something else. The ability to choose our actions. We chose to build peaceful societies. We chose to explore space, not to conquer, but to learn." The security guards looked at each other with confusion. This was not how predators were supposed to act. Where was the aggression? Where were the dominance displays? Where was the hunting behavior they all learned about in school? "Prove it," Zethka said. Jake slowly reached into his clothing. Every weapon in the bay turned toward him. But he only pulled out a small device. He held it where everyone could see and activated it. Music filled the docking bay. Soft, beautiful music like nothing any of them had heard before. It spoke of peace and sadness and hope, all at the same time. The sound made the cubs stop whimpering. It made the adults lower their weapons slightly. "This is what my people create," Jake said as the music played. "We make art and music and stories. We build cities where millions live together in peace. We explore space because we are curious about the universe and the wonderful creatures that live in it." Captain Zethka had lived for 60 years and had never heard a predator speak like this. He had never seen one stand so calmly while surrounded by weapons. Most predators would have either attacked or shown submission by now. This human did neither. He simply stood and waited. "Your ship may remain docked," Zethka said finally, "but you will be watched at all times." Jake smiled, and the expression was not threatening. It was warm and grateful. "Thank you, Captain. I look forward to learning about your people and your ship." As the crowd began to break up, the cubs stayed hidden behind their cargo containers. They watched the human walk away with the captain and his guards. Jake moved slowly and calmly, not like a hunter stalking prey. "Something is wrong," Kesra whispered to his friends. "Predators don't act like that." "Maybe he's hiding his true nature," said Nexus. "All predators hide their true nature until they strike," agreed Torex. The cubs decided they would watch this human very carefully. They had learned in school that predators never truly rested. They were always alert, always ready to hunt. Sooner or later, this Jake Morrison would show his real nature. They had no idea how wrong they were about to be. 3 days had passed since Jake Morrison came aboard the Starbound Harmony. The human had been given guest quarters on Level 5, near the observation lounge. Captain Zethka had assigned 2 guards to watch him at all times, but so far the predator had done nothing threatening. Jake spent most of his time in the ship's library, reading about the different alien cultures. He sat quietly at a corner table, moving through data files on a portable reader. When other passengers walked by, he would nod politely but did not try to force conversations. The adult aliens kept their distance. They were polite when Jake spoke to them, but they did not seek him out. The Thrix merchants clicked nervously when he browsed their shops. The Ashanti diplomats dimmed their natural glow when he passed. Everyone remained alert around the predator, but the cubs could not stay away. Kesra and his pack had been following Jake from a safe distance since the second day. They hid behind corners and watched him through doorways. They wanted to catch him doing something predatory, something that would prove their teachers were right about his kind. "Look at how he sits," whispered Nexus as they crouched behind a planter in the observation lounge. "See how he keeps his back to the wall? That's so nothing can sneak up on him." "And watch his eyes," added Torex. "He looks around every few minutes. He's checking for prey." Kesra nodded. This made sense to him. All the cubs had learned about predator behavior in their species studies classes. Predators never truly relaxed. They were always ready to hunt, always watching for weakness in others. But some things about Jake confused them. He had been reading the same book for 2 hours. It was a collection of Ashanti poetry about crystal formations and light patterns. No predator would waste time reading poetry unless it was part of some hunting strategy. Dr. Nirash, an elderly Thrix scientist, approached Jake's table. She walked slowly on her 6 legs, her mandibles clicking softly. The cubs pressed closer to hear their conversation. "Excuse me," she said in her careful galactic standard. "I am Dr. Nirash. I study different cultures for the Galactic Research Institute. Would you mind if I asked you some questions about human society?" Jake looked up from his reader and smiled. "Of course, Dr. Nirash. I would be honored to help with your research." The old Thrix settled into a chair across from him. Her compound eyes glittered in the lounge's soft lighting. "Your people intrigue me. In all my years of study, I have never encountered a predator species that builds peaceful societies. How is this possible?" Jake leaned back in his chair, thinking. "I suppose it started when we learned to work together instead of competing for everything. When humans discovered that cooperation could accomplish more than individual hunting." "But cooperation is not natural for predators," Dr. Nirash said. "Competition and dominance are the normal behaviors." "True," Jake agreed, "but humans also developed something else as we evolved. We learned to think about our actions before we took them. We could choose to override our instincts when they would cause harm." The cubs listened with growing confusion. This did not match anything they had learned in school. Predators followed their instincts. They did not think about whether those instincts might cause harm. "Can you give me an example?" Dr. Nirash asked. Jake was quiet for a moment. "On Earth, humans often live in cities with millions of other humans. If we followed pure predator instincts, we would fight constantly for territory and resources. Instead, we created laws and social systems that allow us to live together peacefully." "But surely there is still competition among your people." "Yes, but we channel it into non-violent activities. Sports, art, business, science. We compete to create better things, not to destroy each other." Dr. Nirash made notes on her datapad. "This is remarkable. Do all humans possess this ability to override their instincts?" "Most of us learn it as children," Jake said. "We call it self-control. The ability to stop ourselves from doing something we want to do because we know it would be wrong or harmful." The conversation continued for another hour. Jake described human art, music, literature, and philosophy. He talked about humans who dedicated their lives to helping others, even strangers from different countries. He explained how humans had learned to resolve conflicts through discussion rather than violence. The cubs' heads were spinning by the time Dr. Nirash thanked Jake and left. Nothing he said made sense according to their lessons about predators. "He has to be lying," Torex said when they were alone in their hiding spot. "But why would he lie?" Nexus asked, and Dr. Nirash seemed to believe him. Kesra was quiet, thinking hard. "Maybe he's not lying. Maybe he's showing us what he wants us to think while hiding his real nature." That evening, the cubs decided to test their theory. They would watch Jake during the ship's night cycle when most passengers were sleeping. Surely a predator would reveal his true nature when he thought no one was watching. They snuck out of their quarters after their parents had gone to sleep. The corridors were dimly lit during night hours. Emergency lighting cast long shadows that perfect for small cubs to hide in. They found Jake in the observation lounge, sitting in the same chair he had used during the day. But he was not reading now. He sat very still, looking out at the stars through the large window. His hands rested on his knees and his breathing was slow and steady. The cubs watched him for an hour. Jake did not move except to breathe. He did not scan for prey. He did not check his surroundings. He simply sat and looked at the stars. "What is he doing?" whispered Nexus. "I don't know," Kesra admitted. "This is not normal predator behavior." As they watched, other passengers began to notice Jake's strange stillness. A few Ashanti diplomats drifted into the lounge and stood near the windows. Their crystal bodies glowed softly in the starlight. They did not speak to Jake, but they seemed curious about his motionless state. A Thrix merchant entered and took a seat several tables away. She pretended to work on her data pad, but her compound eyes kept glancing toward the still human. Even some adult Veltar came to see what was happening. They stayed near the entrance, ready to run if the predator showed aggression. But Jake continued to sit peacefully, apparently unaware that he was being watched. "This has to be some kind of hunting technique," Torex said. "Maybe he's waiting for prey to come close." But no one came close enough for Jake to reach. And he showed no interest in anyone who entered the lounge. He continued to stare out at the stars with a peaceful expression on his face. The ship's night cycle ended and the lighting gradually returned to normal. Jake finally moved, stretching his arms and rolling his shoulders. He stood up slowly and walked toward the exit. As he passed the hidden cubs, he paused and looked directly at their hiding spot behind the planter. "Good morning," he said quietly. "I hope you slept well." The cubs froze. He had known they were there the whole time. This was it. Now he would show his true predatory nature. Now he would strike. But Jake simply smiled and continued walking. He left the lounge without another word. The cubs remained frozen behind the planter for several minutes after he was gone. "He knew we were watching him," Kesra said finally. "Why didn't he do anything?" asked Nexus. "Predators don't ignore potential prey," said Torex. "It goes against everything we learned in school." Kesra stood up slowly. His young mind struggled to understand what they had witnessed. According to everything he knew about predators, Jake Morrison should have been alert and aggressive. He should have been hunting, or at least preparing to hunt. Instead, he had sat completely still for hours, apparently enjoying the peaceful view of space. And when he discovered he was being watched, he had simply acknowledged the watchers politely and continued on his way. "There's something different about this human," Kesra said. "We need to keep watching him. We need to figure out what he's really doing." The other cubs nodded. They would continue their surveillance. Sooner or later, the predator would reveal his true nature. Their teachers could not be wrong about something so important. But as they returned to their quarters, each cub carried a small seed of doubt. What if their teachers were wrong? What if this human really was different? What if predators could choose to be peaceful? By the end of the first week, the cubs had grown frustrated with their surveillance of Jake Morrison. The human continued to behave in ways that made no sense for a predator. He read books about art and philosophy. He had polite conversations with Dr. Nirash about human culture. He sat quietly in the observation lounge for hours at a time. "This is impossible," Torex said, as the three cubs met in their secret hiding place behind the recycling units. "Predators don't act like this." "Maybe he's smarter than normal predators," suggested Nexus. "Maybe he's planning something really big." Kesra had been thinking about this problem for days. His packmates looked to him for answers because he was the oldest and usually the smartest. But this human puzzled him more than any problem he had ever faced. "I have an idea," Kesra said finally. "We need to test him. We need to create a situation that will force him to show his true predator nature." The other cubs leaned closer. "What kind of test?" Torex asked. "Something that will trigger his hunting instincts. All predators respond to certain situations, no matter how well they hide their nature." Kesra explained his plan. They would create a minor emergency during the ship's night cycle. Nothing dangerous, just enough chaos and stress to make the human react like the predator he really was. When faced with a crisis, surely Jake would abandon his peaceful act and show his true aggressive nature. "We could trigger an alarm in the hydroponics bay," Nexus suggested. "The automated systems would think there was a problem with the air recyclers." "Perfect," said Kesra. "We'll hide nearby and watch how he responds. When the alarms start flashing and everyone is confused, he'll probably try to take advantage of the chaos to hunt someone." 2 nights later, the cubs put their plan into action. They waited until most of the ship was asleep, then snuck into the hydroponics bay where the ship's food plants were grown. Nexus, who was good with computers, managed to trigger a false alarm in the atmospheric monitoring system. Red lights began flashing throughout the bay. Warning sirens wailed loudly enough to wake passengers in nearby sections. The automated voice system announced a potential atmospheric contamination in the growing areas. The cubs hid behind some tall vegetable plants and waited. Soon they heard running footsteps in the corridor outside. People were responding to the emergency as expected. Captain Zethka arrived first, followed by several crew members and his security guards. They began checking the atmospheric readings and trying to locate the source of the problem. Then Jake Morrison appeared in the doorway. The cubs held their breath. This was it. Now they would see the human's true nature. In a crisis situation like this, surely he would show aggression or try to take advantage of the confusion. But Jake did not behave like the predator they expected. Instead of looking for opportunities to hunt, he immediately went to one of the security guards and asked if he could help. When the guard told him to stay back, Jake stepped aside without argument and watched quietly. "There's nothing wrong with the air," announced Chief Engineer Vorthen after checking his instruments. "This appears to be a false alarm." Jake moved closer to the control panel, looking at the readings with interest. "May I?" he asked, pointing to the diagnostic display. Captain Zethka nodded reluctantly. Jake studied the information for several minutes, then pointed to a specific section. "Here," he said. "Someone accessed the monitoring system about 20 minutes ago from a maintenance terminal. The alarm was triggered manually." The cubs felt their hearts sink. He had figured out their trick already. "Who would do such a thing?" Captain Zethka growled. Jake looked around the hydroponics bay carefully. His eyes swept over the growing areas systematically. The cubs pressed themselves deeper into the plants, hoping he would not spot them. But Jake's forward-facing predator eyes were very good at seeing small movements. He noticed the rustling of leaves where there should be no wind. He saw the small shapes crouched among the tomato plants. "I think I know who our culprits are," he said quietly. The cubs expected him to point them out to the security guards. They expected him to demand punishment for their interference. Instead, Jake walked slowly toward their hiding place and sat down, cross-legged on the floor about 10 feet away. "You can come out," he said in a gentle voice. "I'm not angry, and neither is Captain Zethka. We just want to talk." The cubs remained frozen. This was not how predators were supposed to behave. Where was the aggression? Where was the dominance display? Where was the punishment for challenging his authority? "I understand why you did this," Jake continued, still speaking softly. "You wanted to see how I would react under pressure. You wanted to know if I'm really as peaceful as I seem." Slowly, reluctantly, Kesra stood up from behind the plants. His packmates followed, all 3 cubs trembling with fear and confusion. Captain Zethka's ears flattened against his head when he saw them. "Cubs, what are you doing here? You should be in your quarters." "Don't be too hard on them, Captain," Jake said. "They're just curious about something they don't understand." Jake looked directly at Kesra, and the young Veltar felt those predator eyes examining him. But there was no threat in Jake's gaze. Instead, there was something that looked like kindness and understanding. "You've been watching me for days," Jake said. "You expected me to hunt, didn't you? Your teachers told you that predators never rest, never stop looking for prey." Kesra nodded, unable to speak. "Your teachers were right about most predator species," Jake said. "But humans learned to be different. We learned that being able to hunt doesn't mean we have to hunt. We learned that being strong doesn't mean we have to use that strength to hurt others." "That's impossible," Torex said, finding his voice. "Predators always follow their instincts." Jake smiled, and again the expression was warm rather than threatening. "Let me tell you about human meditation, young Torex. It's a practice that teaches us how to be completely still, completely peaceful, even when we could choose to be violent." "What's meditation?" asked Nexus. "It's the art of controlling your own mind," Jake explained. "Instead of letting our instincts control us, we learn to control our instincts. We can choose to be calm instead of aggressive. We can choose to be helpful instead of competitive. We can choose to sit quietly and appreciate beauty instead of constantly looking for things to hunt." The security guards and crew members listened with fascination. None of them had ever heard of such a thing. "But how do you survive if you don't hunt?" Kesra asked. "We learn to grow food instead of hunting it," Jake said. "We learn to build communities where everyone helps everyone else. We learned that cooperation is often better than competition." Dr. Narash had arrived during the conversation, drawn by reports of the false alarm. She approached the group with great interest. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "would you be willing to demonstrate this meditation for us? I would very much like to observe this behavior for my research." Jake nodded. "Of course, but it's not really a demonstration. It's just sitting quietly and choosing to be peaceful." He remained sitting on the floor, but he straightened his back and placed his hands on his knees. Then he closed his eyes and began breathing slowly and deeply. The cubs watched in amazement. Jake's entire body became still. His breathing slowed even more. His facial expression became completely calm and relaxed. "He's not scanning for threats," Nexus whispered. "He's not watching for prey," added Torex. "He's just sitting there," said Kesra with wonder in his voice. They watched Jake sit in perfect stillness for several minutes. His predator nature seemed to have disappeared completely. He looked more peaceful than any creature they had ever seen. Finally, Jake opened his eyes and smiled at them. "That's meditation," he said. "It's choosing to be still instead of always moving, choosing to be calm instead of always alert, choosing to find peace instead of always hunting." Captain Zethka stared at the human with confusion and growing respect. "I have never seen anything like this," he admitted. "Any of us can learn it," Jake said. "It's not about being human. It's about choosing to be peaceful, no matter what kind of creature you are." The cubs looked at each other with amazement. Everything they thought they knew about predators had been wrong. At least, it was wrong about this particular predator. "Could you teach us?" Kesra asked quietly. Jake's smile became even warmer. "I would be honored to teach anyone who wants to learn." As the group dispersed and the cubs returned to their quarters, their minds were full of new ideas. Perhaps their teachers had been wrong. Perhaps predators could choose to be different. Perhaps this human was showing them that any creature could learn to find peace within themselves, but they still had many questions. And Jake Morrison had become far more interesting than they had ever imagined. Word of Jake's demonstration spread quickly through the starbound Harmony. Within 2 days, nearly everyone aboard the ship had heard about the human who could sit perfectly still and choose to be peaceful instead of predatory. Jake had asked Captain Zethka for permission to hold daily meditation sessions in the observation lounge. The captain was still wary of the human, but he had seen nothing threatening in Jake's behavior. After discussing it with his senior officers, he agreed. "But I want security present at all times," Zethka insisted. "Of course," Jake replied. "Anyone who wishes to observe or participate is welcome." The first session was scheduled for the morning after the regular sleep cycle. Jake arrived early and arranged some cushions in a circle near the large window that looked out at the stars. He sat down cross-legged in the center and waited. The cubs were the first to arrive. Kesra, Nexus, and Torex crept into the lounge and found seats where they could watch, but quickly run away if needed. They were still not entirely sure they could trust a predator, even one who claimed to be peaceful. Dr. Nirash came next, followed by two Ashanti diplomats whose crystal bodies sparkled with curiosity. A few Thrix merchants clicked softly as they took positions near the back of the room. Even some adult Veltar gathered by the entrance, ready to protect the cubs if necessary. Captain Zethka stood in the doorway with two security guards, watching carefully. "Thank you all for coming," Jake said in his quiet voice. "I want to explain what we're going to do because it may seem strange to you." He looked around at the assembled aliens, making eye contact with each species represented. "Meditation is not about doing something," he continued. "It's about not doing things. We're going to practice sitting still, breathing slowly, and letting our minds become calm." "What's the purpose?" asked one of the Ashanti diplomats. Her crystalline voice chimed like bells. "To learn that we have control over our own thoughts and reactions," Jake explained. "Instead of always responding to our instincts, we can choose how we want to think and feel." The Thrix merchant raised one of her clawed hands. "Is this some kind of human religious practice?" "Some humans use meditation as part of their religion," Jake said, "but it's not religious by itself. It's more like exercise for the mind. Just as we can strengthen our bodies through physical training, we can strengthen our ability to stay calm through mental training." He gestured for everyone to sit comfortably. "You don't have to join me. You can just watch if you prefer. But if you'd like to try, simply sit in whatever position feels comfortable and close your eyes." A few of the aliens exchanged uncertain glances. The idea of closing their eyes near a predator went against every survival instinct they possessed. Jake seemed to understand their hesitation. "You don't have to close your eyes if it makes you uncomfortable. You can keep them open and just focus on your breathing." Slowly, carefully, some of the observers decided to participate. Dr. Nirash lowered herself onto one of the cushions, her 6 legs folding beneath her gracefully. The Ashanti diplomats dimmed their natural glow and settled onto the floor. Even a few of the adult Veltar moved closer, though they kept their eyes open and their ears alert. The cubs watched as Jake began the session. He closed his eyes and started breathing slowly and deeply. His entire body relaxed, and that strange, peaceful expression appeared on his face again. "Just focus on your breathing," he said softly. "Don't try to change it. Just notice it. When your mind starts thinking about other things, gently bring your attention back to your breath." The room became very quiet. The only sounds were the soft hum of the ship's engines and the gentle breathing of the participants. Jake sat perfectly still in the center of the group, his predator nature completely hidden beneath layers of calm. Dr. Nirash found the experience fascinating. Her scientific mind tried to analyze what was happening, but gradually she found herself simply enjoying the peaceful feeling. Her compound eyes closed as she focused on the rhythm of her own breathing. The Ashanti diplomats discovered that meditation enhanced their natural ability to control their crystalline glow. They could dim their light to almost nothing, creating a sense of deep inner quiet that they had never experienced before. Even some of the Veltar began to relax. Their ears stopped twitching at every small sound. Their muscles released tension they didn't know they had been carrying. But it was Kesra who experienced the most dramatic change, as he watched Jake's peaceful stillness. Something shifted in the young cub's understanding. For the first time in his life, he saw a predator who was not hunting, not competing, not displaying dominance. Jake was simply being at peace with himself and his surroundings. After 20 minutes, Jake slowly opened his eyes and smiled at the group. "Thank you," he said. "How did that feel?" "Strange," admitted one of the Veltar adults. "But also calming." "I didn't know my mind could be so quiet," said Dr. Narash. "Usually my thoughts are always moving, always analyzing. This was different." The Ashanti diplomats glowed softly with what Jake recognized as contentment. "We felt more connected to our inner crystal matrix," one of them chimed. "More aware of our own energy patterns." Captain Zethka had watched the entire session from the doorway. He had never seen anything like it. A room full of different species, all sitting peacefully together, all learning something from a predator who chose to be gentle instead of aggressive. "Will you do this again tomorrow?" asked Kesra. "If people want me to," Jake replied. "Meditation works best when it's practiced regularly." Over the following days, the meditation sessions grew larger. More aliens joined each morning, curious about this strange human practice that could make a predator choose stillness over action. Dr. Nirash began keeping detailed notes about the psychological effects she observed. Participants reported feeling less anxious, less competitive with each other, and more able to control their emotional responses to stress. The ship's medical officer, Dr. Blovin, asked permission to scan some of the regular participants. His tentacles trembled with excitement as he showed the results to Captain Zethka. "Look at these readings," he said, displaying holographic charts in the air. "Reduced stress hormones across all species, lower heart rates, brain patterns showing increased calm and focus. This human practice is actually changing their biology." But the most remarkable change was in the cubs. Kesra had become a regular participant, sitting quietly for the full 20 minutes each morning. His packmates joined him, and gradually other young aliens began attending as well. "I used to be afraid all the time," Kesra told Jake after one session. "Afraid of predators, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being hurt. But when I meditate, I'm not afraid of anything." "Fear can be useful," Jake replied. "It keeps us safe from real dangers. But when we're afraid all the time, even when there's no danger, that's not helpful. Meditation teaches us the difference." Captain Zethka found himself stopping by the sessions more and more often. He never participated, but he watched with growing interest. The predator who had terrified him on the first day was teaching his passengers to find peace within themselves. One evening, as Jake was cleaning up the cushions after a session, the captain approached him. "I owe you an apology," Zethka said. "When you first came aboard, I assumed you were dangerous because of your species. I was wrong." Jake looked up from his work. "You weren't wrong to be careful, Captain. You have a responsibility to protect your passengers. But thank you for giving me a chance to show that not all predators are the same." "How did your people learn this?" Zethka asked. "How did an entire species of predators choose to become peaceful?" Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen all at once. For thousands of years, humans fought each other constantly. We had wars that killed millions. But gradually, we realized that we were strong enough to choose a different path. "And now all humans meditate?" Jake laughed softly. "No, not all of us. But enough of us learned these practices that we could teach them to others. We discovered that inner peace is something that can spread from person to person, like a good idea or a beautiful song." Captain Zethka looked out at the stars through the observation window. "Perhaps this is something that could spread to other species as well." "Perhaps it is," Jake agreed. Perhaps that's why we were meant to meet each other." As the captain walked away, Jake continued arranging the meditation area for the next morning. Tomorrow would bring another opportunity to show that predators could choose stillness over hunting, peace over violence, cooperation over competition. The cubs would be there, as they had been every morning for a week. Dr. Nirash would continue her research. The Ashanti diplomats would explore new depths of crystalline harmony. And slowly, quietly, a new understanding was spreading through the ship. The understanding that any creature, no matter what their evolutionary heritage, could learn to find peace within themselves. 3 weeks had passed since Jake Morrison first stepped aboard the Starbound Harmony. The ship that had once been filled with fear and suspicion now hummed with a different kind of energy. Every morning, dozens of aliens gathered in the observation lounge for meditation. Every evening, small groups continued to practice on their own. The change was remarkable. Thrix merchants who had previously competed aggressively for customers now worked together to help each other succeed. Ashanti diplomats discovered new depths of harmony in their crystalline consciousness. Veltar families found that their pack bonds grew stronger when they learned to sit quietly together. But nowhere was the change more obvious than in the cubs. Kesra had become Jake's most dedicated student. Every morning he arrived early to help arrange the cushions. Every evening he practiced the breathing exercises Jake had taught him. His young mind had absorbed the lessons of meditation with surprising speed. "Jake," Kesra said one morning as they prepared the lounge for the daily session, "I have a question." "Of course," Jake replied, setting down a stack of cushions. "What would you like to know?" "Before you came here, I was afraid of everything. Afraid of predators, afraid of making mistakes, afraid of being weak. But now, I'm not afraid anymore. How did sitting quietly change me so much?" Jake sat down on one of the cushions and patted the one beside him. Kesra settled next to the human, no longer frightened by his predator nature. "You learned something very important," Jake said. "You learned that you have power over your own mind. Fear comes from inside us, not from outside. When we understand that, we can choose whether to be afraid or to be calm. But what if there really is something dangerous? What if a real predator comes aboard the ship?" Jake smiled. "Then your fear would be useful. It would help you stay safe. The difference is that now you can tell the difference between real danger and imaginary fear. You won't spend your life being afraid of things that can't actually hurt you." More aliens began arriving for the morning session. Dr. Nirash took her usual spot near the front, her research notes tucked away for later. The Ashanti diplomats arranged themselves in a perfect hexagon, their crystal bodies already beginning to dim in preparation for deep meditation. Captain Zethka had started joining the sessions a few days earlier. He sat near the back, still alert, but no longer tense with suspicion. His transformation had been one of the most dramatic. The captain who had once viewed Jake as a threat now considered him one of the ship's most valuable passengers. As the meditation began, Jake looked around at the peaceful faces surrounding him. Aliens from a dozen different worlds, all sitting together in harmony, all choosing stillness over constant motion, peace over endless competition. But he knew his time aboard the Starbound Harmony was almost over. The New Horizons was scheduled to depart in 2 days to continue its exploration mission. Soon he would have to say goodbye to the friends he had made. After the session ended and most of the participants had left, Kesra approached Jake with his packmates beside him. "We heard you're leaving soon," the young cub said. "We wanted to ask you something important." "What is it?" Jake asked. "Will you teach other humans about what you learned here? Will you tell them that aliens can be peaceful too?" Jake's expression grew thoughtful. "That's an interesting question, Kesra. What made you think of it?" "Well," Nexus said, stepping forward, "we used to think all predators were dangerous. But you taught us that predators can choose to be peaceful. Maybe other humans think all aliens are dangerous too." Maybe they need to learn that we can choose to be peaceful as well, added Torex. Jake felt a deep warmth in his chest. These young cubs had learned one of the most important lessons any being could learn. They had discovered that understanding and compassion could bridge any gap between species. Yes, he said, I will definitely share what I've learned here. Humans need to understand that the universe is full of wonderful beings who want to live in peace. Dr. Narration approached the group, her compound eyes gleaming with excitement. Mr. Morrison, I've compiled my research into a comprehensive report. Would you be willing to take copies to share with human scientists? I would be honored to, Jake replied. My findings show that meditation and peaceful practices can work for any species, she continued. The biological changes we observed were consistent across all participants, regardless of their evolutionary background. This could revolutionize how different species interact with each other. Captain Zethka joined them, looking unusually emotional for a Veltar. Jake, I want to apologize again for my initial reaction to your arrival. I let my prejudices cloud my judgment. There's no need to apologize, Captain, Jake said. Your caution was understandable. I hope other ship captains will be willing to give humans the same chance you gave me. After what I've witnessed here, any human ship will be welcomed in our space, Zethka declared. I'll be sending reports to the Galactic Council recommending that humans be granted immediate peaceful contact status. On his final evening aboard the ship, Jake was surprised to find a large gathering in the observation lounge. Nearly 300 passengers had come to say goodbye. Representatives from every species aboard the ship were present. The Ashanti diplomats had prepared a crystal sculpture that captured the light in patterns representing peace and harmony. The Thrix merchants presented him with a collection of art objects from their homeworlds. The Veltar families offered traditional songs of friendship and safe journeys. But it was the cubs who gave Jake the gift that moved him most deeply. Kesra stood before the assembled crowd and spoke in a clear, confident voice. Before Jake came here, we thought we knew everything about predators. We thought they were always dangerous, always hunting, always angry. We were wrong. He turned to face Jake directly. You taught us that any being can choose to be peaceful. You showed us that understanding each other is better than being afraid of each other. You proved that sitting quietly and choosing stillness can be the strongest thing anyone can do. The other cubs stepped forward, and together they recited words they had written themselves. We promise to teach other young ones what you taught us. We promise to remember that fear comes from inside, not outside. We promise to choose understanding instead of judgment, peace instead of conflict, cooperation instead of competition. Jake felt tears gathering in his eyes. These young beings had learned lessons that would stay with them for their entire lives. They would carry the seeds of peace to their own worlds and their own children. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You have given me something more valuable than any gift. You have shown me that different species can learn from each other, grow together, and build friendships that cross every boundary. The next morning, Jake gathered his few belongings and prepared to return to the New Horizons, but he was not leaving empty-handed. He carried with him Dr. Narasha's research, Captain Zethka's recommendations, and most importantly, the knowledge that peace could spread from being to being like ripples in still water. As his shuttle pulled away from the starbound Harmony, Jake looked back through the small porthole. In the observation lounge, he could see the morning meditation session beginning without him. Dozens of aliens sat in peaceful silence, practicing the stillness he had taught them. But they no longer needed him to lead them. They had learned to find peace within themselves. Months later, when the first human diplomatic mission arrived at the Galactic Council, they were greeted not with suspicion and fear, but with curiosity and welcome. Captain Zethka's reports had preceded them, along with Dr. Narasha's research and testimonies from hundreds of beings who had learned that predators could choose to be peaceful. The cubs who had once insisted that predators never rest had grown into young adults who taught others about the power of choosing stillness. They became ambassadors in their own right, traveling to different worlds and sharing the lessons they had learned from a human who sat quietly and showed them a different way to live. And throughout the galaxy, a new understanding began to spread. The understanding that any being, regardless of their evolutionary heritage, could choose peace over conflict, cooperation over competition, and stillness over endless motion. Jake Morrison's quiet revolution had begun with a single meditation session. It would eventually change how entire civilizations thought about strength, power, and the true meaning of courage. Sometimes the greatest victories came not from fighting, but from the wisdom to sit still and show others the peace that was possible when beings chose to understand each other instead of fear each other. The Predator had indeed shown them something they never expected. He had shown them that true strength came from within, and that the greatest hunters were those who chose never to hunt at all.